ready. Thank you.
Father, what news? What is the prince's doom?
A gentler judgment vanished from his lips. Not body's death, but body's banishment.
Huh? Banishment? Be merciful, say death. For exile hath more terror in his look, much more than death. Do not say banishment.
Here from Verona art thou banished. Be patient, for the world is broad and wide.
There is no world without Verona walls, but purgatory, torture, hell itself. Hence banished is banished from the world, and world's exile is death. Then banished is death mistermed. Calling death banished, thou cutt'st my head off with a golden axe and smilest upon the stroke that murders me.
Oh, deadly sin! Oh, rude unthankfulness! Thy fault our law calls death, but the kind prince, taking thy part, hath thrust aside the law and turned that black word death to banishment. This is dear mercy, and thou seest it not.
'Tis torture and not mercy. Heaven is here, where Juliet lives, and every cat and dog and little mouse, every unworthy thing live here in heaven and may look on her, but Romeo may not. He is banished. And say'st thou yet that exile is not death? Hadst thou no poison mixed? No sharp ground knife? No sudden mean of death, though ne'er so mean, but banished to kill me? Banished? Oh, friar, the damned use that word in hell. Howling attends it. How hast thou the heart, being a divine, a ghostly confessor, a sin absolver, and my friend professed, to mangle me with that word banished?
Oh, I see, then, that madmen have no ears.
How should they, when that wise men have no eyes?
Let me dispute with thee of thy estate.
Thou canst not speak of that thou dost not feel. Wert thou as young as I, Juliet thy love, an hour but married, Tybalt murdered, doting like me, and like me banished, then mightst thou speak, then mightst thou tear thy hair, and fall upon the ground as I do now, taking the measure of an unmade grave.
Okay, let's just skip ahead to page 51, where Romeo is about to self-harm. Should we go from Oh Tell Me, Friar, Tell Me? Or do you want to go from somewhere else?
No, yeah, that's good, that's good. Oh, tell me, friar, tell me, in what vile part of this anatomy doth my name lodge? Tell me that I may sack the hateful mansion.
Hold thy desperate hand! Art thou a man? Thy form cries out thou art, thy tears are womanish. Thy wild acts denote the unreasonable fury of a beast. Unseemly woman in a seeming man, and ill-beseeming beast in seeming both. Thou hast amazed me. By my holy order, I thought thy disposition better tempered. Hast thou slain Tybalt? Wilt thou slay thyself, and slay thy lady that in thy life lives, by doing damned hate upon thyself? What? Rouse thee, man! Thy Juliet is alive, for whose dear sake thou wast but lately dead. There art thou happy. Tybalt would kill thee, but thou slewest Tybalt. There art thou happy. The law that threatened death becomes thy friend and turns it to exile. There art thou happy. A pack of blessings light upon thy back. Happiness courts thee in her best array. But like a mishavered and sullen wench, thou pout'st upon thy fortune and thy love. Take heed, for such die miserable.
Brilliant, thank you. It's so nice to hear you read.
Yeah, it's really lovely.
So there's lots to talk about, I guess, from there. And us in the room, rehearsal room, being really, I just thought for myself, really surprised to hear how you shun Romeo for being womanish. Just all of the kind of toxic masculinity that is thrown around. And the idea so that in itself, likening Romeo to a beast is really interesting.
It's a completely different. Romeo and Juliet both at different points threaten to kill themselves, and Friar handles it
Both, yeah.
completely different.
Yeah.
But I think with Romeo, because he calls him a ghostly confessor, sin absolver, and my friend professed. And I have an emotional investment here. He's not just one of the flock. I love him.
Yeah.
And he almost berates him. You know,
Yeah.
he castigates, and I think he's so stunned. And it's an interesting approach. But he's saying, you're so blessed. You've got so many things going for you. You know, you could have been dead, but you killed Tybalt. You know, you should have a death sentence upon you, but it's been changed to exile. And you know, Juliet, your love is alive and well. And
you're both working on different planes, though, aren't you? Both different kind of brains and logic happening.
And kind of it encapsulates the kind of those two approaches. On the one hand, man up. And on the other hand, be grateful.
Yeah.
And when you work with young people and their parents tell them to man up or be grateful, I can tell you exactly where it goes. It falls literally upon deaf ears. Literally upon the madman.
You
can't actually hear.
Yeah,
you can't actually hear, because of course when you're in your emotional brain experiencing the outburst that Romeo was experiencing in that scene, it just reminds me of, kind of as a parent as well, how we feel as though our role is to rescue. We find it very difficult to see one of our children, in inverted commas, in such emotional pain. So first of all, we try and say, look, come on, man up. Other people would do this better than you're doing. And then we kind of go to be grateful. And then we rescue them with a plan. So actually, Romeo doesn't ever get to actually sit with his pain, which is, of course, is at the heart of all of our modern mental health problems. We don't know how to sit with emotional pain. We put so much energy into getting rid of it, whether that be through self-harm or ultimately suicide. So this idea of madness as well that comes into it, actually you could argue that in that scene that Romeo is unhinged, but he's not unhinged as in he's mad. He's unhinged as in his brain is literally unhinged. His ability to access the kind of the human part of his brain to be able to problem solve and rationalize and use his resources to predict or to forecast a better future, they're not there.
No.
So he's in his emotional brain, and Friar Lawrence is just looking, thinking, whoa, what can I do to fix this? As an actual fact, what we know that might have been a bit more helpful is that if it helped Romeo get his brain back on gear and actually, literally say, use that magic word, if. If I were in the situation that you were in, I too would be experiencing this level of emotional angst. And that, of course, can sometimes shift the axis rather than just be grateful, and especially man up, which, of course, is still, sadly, a view that having emotional pain, there is something about that is
masculine.
the language of effeminate, isn't it? Often in the book.
Yeah. It's really interesting too that, I mean, I usually struggle with the idea that Romeo and Juliet are so madly in love with each other that the only thing they can imagine to escape their situation is to kill themselves. Like that to me is a massive jump. But viewing it through this lens of people being vulnerable or unwell or not being able to access their full self makes so much sense to me.
Yeah.
And gets me to understand that could be me too. It could happen to anyone.
Absolutely. And
what I find really useful about that is the way I hope to frame people means that you go, I've looked at this person and assumed they were someone or assumed they were okay. But within this production, I can peel away and go, oh no, they're not. So how many other people that I walk past on the street are also in this situation? So it means, that's what I find really useful, is that I hope we can make people curious about other people's conditions. Because even someone like Tybalt, we were really thinking about how violent he is and where that comes from. and what trauma he has.
I guess maybe the fear is that if I recognise your pain, I might make it legitimate, and then you'll act on it.
But then that's about not wanting to see it, which is why
Exactly.
very often as parents we miss so much. And as teachers and as educators, we miss so much because we actually don't want to see it in the same way that Friar Lawrence really didn't want to see how
Yeah.
desperate this was. But once presented with it, he felt the need to act. It was almost impossible for him to just be. He had to do.
And I just defy anyone, when you're emotionally involved and you see young people suffering, you do anything to, in this context, stop them from killing themselves, A, but B, take away the pain. And I think, again, that's where the vial might come from. Just don't kill yourself, but just here's a temporary solution to what might be a spiritual problem, which is ironic because it's concocted in the safe space of the monastery. I think it's no wonder that they both are able to confide in him, but at their wits' end, if they're going to do it in front of anybody, it's Friar.
Yeah, they could be vulnerable. They could be vulnerable with him, and it's kind of, you know, what we used to call melancholy, and of course we now call depression, and it's kind of melancholy and counsel in Romeo and Juliet, and I guess it's depression and counselling now at this time. But you know, the notion is the same, that actually depression is an illness and requires treatment. I also, in my mind's eye as well, see Friar Lawrence as somebody who would be looking into the eyes of Romeo and Juliet, which of course is the first thing to do when you're with somebody who's experiencing a panic attack or is in a state of high emotional arousal. Just looking into somebody's eyes, you know, that little fix of oxytocin, kind of just trying to help move the kind of arousal in the brain down a few notches, and looking into the eyes of somebody that you trust and know, of course, is more powerful than any medication or any other treatment. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a very special relationship. Whether or not I think Friar Lawrence's advice was particularly helpful, but I guess it's the very fact that he could be vulnerable with him, because vulnerability, as Brené Brown would say, you know, comes before courage. And actually we need to be vulnerable before we can actually, you know, we need to see that there are parts of ourselves, as Romeo says in that script that you've just read, where he says, I don't want to accept the part of me that's done this. He's finding it really hard to accept the murderer part of him within himself. And of course that then goes back to self-harming and suicidal behaviour. If this is in me, the only way to get rid of it is to actually end me. And that's where young people's perspective on experience, you know, sort of what somebody does, behaviour versus person. You know, I can be a great person with promise, but I can do something that was less than wise. So I think Friar Lawrence was in the sense of the way that you've just depicted it, was being a counsellor, doing his best with what he had, and I guess it kept Romeo in the play a bit longer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a little bit longer.
Yeah.
We've just heard an extract from a very particular moment where you have killed someone and seen your best friend murdered, and now you're really worried about your wife. Like that is so much of a burden to carry. But I'm also thinking about being young on top of that, being black on top of that, like all of these things stacked up.
Yeah.
And what that does to your mental
Yeah,
health. I'm
absolutely.
guessing it doesn't make it any easier.
Yeah. Everybody's ready. Or you have to be ready all of the time, don't you? You have to be vigilant. You have to be have that jumpy amygdala. You have to be prepared. And there's so much brain chemical changes that happen when you're walking down the streets expecting to be attacked any moment. Your brain's bad enough looking for trouble all the time. You know, they always say the adolescent brain is sort of Velcro for trouble and Teflon for good stuff. You know, the amygdala has, 2/3 of the part of our alarm system in our brain is looking for trouble. A teenage brain scours its environment 4 times every second looking for threat.
Wow.
So can you imagine being in an environment, which a lot of young people today see school as being that environment, where you're just waiting for something to go horribly wrong? So yeah, being in that environment is not going to help young people access the rest and digest setting in their brain, which we would like them to do more of. So it's harder when there really is a danger. It's not just the internal triggers, it's actually the real life dangers too. So you're running away from the external and the internal. I'm not surprised there was a lot of risk-taking behaviour on the streets and the number of fights and brawls.
Yeah.
And those kind of demonstrating masculinity in a way that was profoundly, well, damaging.
And the fact that you're
I guess I've had a more fraught relationship with my mental health over the last 3 months or however long than I really had ever had before, partly because I had my coping mechanisms in place and they were quite successful, whatever, and I had support structures and had all sorts of things. That's not to say that I haven't had those things, but I think as many people have probably found in this time, this has been a very extreme time in lots of ways and has brought up a lot of things. So there's a line where Mercutio says we've got to go to the party and you're going to have to dance. See if I can remember it off the top of my head, but Romeo says, "Not I, believe me. You have dancing shoes with nimble soles. I have a soul of lead, so stakes me to the ground I cannot move." And I read that today and I thought, well, that echoes differently inside me.
And also the fact that you feel, well, Romeo, not you, Alfie, feels that without Juliet, life is hell.
I think we have this idea of sort of romantic love as something that can complete you. And I think that's an idea that Romeo massively clings onto. And so this is his self-harm.
Yeah.
This is his suicide. And that's why the two choices are there, because that is the solution.
Yeah.
If not...
that's really interesting what you just said as well about the not knowing. I think it was, I read a quote, I think it's Bertrand Russell who said that Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy of unawareness. And I really thought about that because actually there's a lot of truth in that. It's not just the parents being unaware as to what the emotional temperature of their children were, but it is actually Romeo not being able to reveal all of himself to those that are closest around him. And that sense of belonging, when you work with young people and do values work with them, that sense of belonging is the most important value of any young person that I've ever worked with. And I think what you're saying is that maybe in the absence of feeling that sense of belonging in his group of friends and in his family, he had an enhanced sense of belonging in his connection,
and in his
however
society,
short-lived. Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, that becomes so pivotal. I mean, just what you said, the unawareness, I think also in himself of the root of the issue or something that needs to be looked at beyond, that his love for Juliet cannot fix these things. And I think that we get into that Jung quote.
You
said,
do it, go for it.
I'm just going to
You do
read
the
it because
quote.
it's not, I didn't find it. But it's brilliant. And I think for understanding certainly Romeo's journey through the play, it's so central and so helpful to have it. Apparently, the quote is, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate."
One more time, because it's
so-
golden.
It is.
Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yeah, and
I
that
think
is that is so interesting because that's also about now what we know about sort of generational trauma as well, that actually, you know, that our parents' sort of traumas, experiences and traits live within us. And actually they're often unconscious. And actually, so knowing about them, even if we choose to sort of reject them, it's actually really important that we can find a place inside ourselves that can soften towards them too. So I think that's where awareness then comes in, and of course that introduces fate again, doesn't it?
Right.
This idea that somebody is on a you know, a
Destined.
path and nothing is going to take them off it, which of course is how somebody who's had a depression diagnosis often feels. They feel as though they know where this is going. And
Wow,
that can
that's
be,
really
that's the
helpful.
black and white thinking that then comes in with the light and dark, I guess, which is reflected in the text so
Yeah.
frequently. So
Even the idea of people talking a lot about blaming the adults for Romeo and Juliet's deaths, I think that's unfair. I'm like, I don't think it's necessarily generational. I think it's everyone is sick. No one can see what's right and wrong. It's actually about the powers that be not being great at their job. It's that thing I was talking about in terms of a violent society is a broken society. It's not just about going like, yeah, you should control your kids. It's like, but why are they violent? It's kind of beyond parenting.
And that's what I think we really want our production to speak to, is the idea that there are, even though it may feel impossible, there are other avenues, there are other choices, but actually those avenues and choices feel impossible because the structure of society is
Reinforcing our coping mechanisms.
exactly,
in so many
thank
ways.
you. Yeah, and it's about us really highlighting what those social ills are so we can try and break them or remedy them or whatever we're trying to do. But at least we want to know that they're not, we don't want them to be invisible anymore.
no,
People aware of them.
I'm just thinking about lockdown. It's like the absence of other influences when we're spending too much time on our own. And we know for young people, spending too much time on their own is not necessarily a great place to be. So in the absence of the structures of school and education, then children have become quite resourceful during lockdown to get their needs met. Of course, it comes down to the family disharmony as well with Romeo and Juliet. You know, we've left a lot of young people in situations domestically where they are vulnerable.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that sort of 1 in 8, 11 to 18-year-olds in the UK has a diagnosable mental health disorder, and that's 1 in 4 by the time they get to 17. So, and we know that 75% of young people that need help don't get it. So I think what's going to happen with this period of COVID is that there are going to be a lot of people who don't get the support and the need and the help that they need. And we want to make sure it's the right help, not always, you know, Far Lawrence was the right, you know, seeking wise counsel. We can't often be that discerning, can we, about what we choose. We tend to just nowadays put a Google search in and see where it takes us. Of course, Romeo couldn't do that, could he?
But he's right then, so banishment really is hell.
Yeah, because it's not him and there's him, there's Juliet. Their rings overlap.
Yeah.
There's no wiggle room there. So he is her and she is him. So if he's banished from her, there is no life. And that's where you see a lot of suicidal ideation amongst young men in particular in a counselling room, where you see not just the hopelessness of a situation, but you also see an adult, just like you've depicted, saying something and the young person turning around going, what do you know? What are you, an old person? What do you know about what it's like to be me in this situation? What do you know about what it's like? You know what it's like to be black, but you don't know what it's like to be black in this time. And you can kind of see that resistance to counsel. And so, but then if we go to our peers for help, that can also be a tricky place to be too.
Yeah.
Well, I was talking to another director just a year ago about the play, and the one thing that we tried to work out how to do was the storyline with the characters being quarantined because of a plague. And just a year ago, it was so outlandish and it was so far-fetched that he was concerned about how an audience could possibly relate to it. It's so heightened, and just a year later it's happened in our lifetime. Very sadly, there are a wave since we've come out of lockdown and since before of violence between youth and stabbings and feuding factions, and that's very much prevalent in Knife and in the play, obviously.
I found it so shocking preparing for rehearsals to see how many times both Romeo and
It's
Juliet
referenced,
say,
yeah.
I'm going to kill myself, in front of an audience, like two adults, to the nurse and to the friar, and they're just kind of like patted on the back going, not yet, or not even not yet,
Yeah.
but just relax. But I just made me wonder, like, if that behaviour is common with people that are suffering, because it feels like a really obvious plea for help.
I agree with you all in this. The language has almost lost its, no one's really believing it. The words are coming out, even though I know he's feeling it. But it's there's so much in Romeo and Juliet where death is mentioned, and it's almost as though it's this postponement, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Well, I mean, there's an argument that those people that are
Are your
supposed to
parents.
be, or whoever,
Yeah.
and myself included, people that are supposed to be the moral compass of the play, you could argue are the most morally bankrupt.
Yeah.
I mean, our friar does some awful things in his attempt to try and avert the worst case scenario. He does some terrible things. But yes, maybe that's the best that they can get in our world. This, and who's to say it wouldn't be worse if they'd gone to mum and dad.
Yes,
Yeah.
and good friends. So
Yeah.
that's the other thing. So peer support is so important
Oh, there we go.
for young people. But as you said, the inability to be able to disclose both vulnerability and also the fact that you've married somebody but you haven't actually shared it with
Right,
anybody. So the effort that goes
Yeah.
into not disclosing those
Even
two.
even if there wasn't a psychiatrist, it's just going, by the way, Lady Montague, your son's not feeling very well. And by the way, I don't know, Mercutio, maybe look out for Romeo today.
Yeah,
He's
that's the
acting a
modern
bit-
day equivalent.
Exactly, just connecting up the network a bit.
You know, I mean, sort of Juliet, from the age of 13 upwards, you're falling out of love with your parents, in love with your peers. That is the whole point. That's the whole end game of adolescence. So actually peers become much more important, which is why you see so many young people, and that's what I love about Romeo and Juliet, because it depicts it so well. So many young people compromise on morality for membership of a group.
We were also talking about earlier on identity, right? And going, what also Ree was saying might connect Romeo and Juliet is the fact that within their groups, their social groups, they are the only black person. And we know that in this production, Romeo's friends are both white, and his community seems quite white too. And so whether there's anything within that, and also I guess if there's anything in the violence you display as a black man, if that is somehow demonized more than the violence that other people display within the group or not. But that's me again going like with words like beast and Black Death.
Black
Well, there
Death.
was that teacher that came in that said Tybalt calls him boy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you guys have
that
got
was
a black
Yeah.
actor playing Romeo. You'd be mad not to
Use
to
that.
yeah.
Exactly. So like all of that, how that heightens your sense of loss or the need to escape or the need to belong or all those
Yeah,
things, like
yeah,
what that does.
absolutely.
And maybe, are we saying that Romeo and Juliet don't recognise they're the only people that within their groups that look a certain way? Or are we saying, and even that in itself seems unhealthy, to not be able to see yourself? Let's look at that and not this.
That and not that. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, that's demagoguery over history. Do you know what I mean? They're the problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that
Yes.
unites us.
Blame,
Yeah.
yes, oh absolutely,
In
yes.
a
Exactly.
way.
And it's also something, I guess, about, just remembering that, a child's brain develops from the bottom up. So we expect, Romeo and Juliet to be able to reason and rationalise and draw on the past, apply it to the future and forecast the future, that their brains are not there yet, especially Juliet. So her ability to be able to put her lid back on and actually have an integrated brain and make wise choices is diminished hugely. So I guess it's the compassion of the audience too, isn't it? In understanding that they are not fully cooked, that they are works in progress. And whilst we might look at them and think, I wouldn't have done that, the reality is that our brains would have been underdeveloped at that stage too. It's not a criticism, it's just how it is.
And it feels like the playwrights understood that exceptionally well.
Absolutely,
That's the thing that made it so amazing for me. I was like, you go back and you look at it, you're like, wow, this is...
Yeah, he did understand that really well.
Extraordinary.
Yeah. So I know that people don't see it as a kind of really deep study of the human condition, but there are some bits in it that really just encapsulate, I think, really well, which is maybe the unawareness, that lack of awareness that we have as teenagers. You know, that's simmering throughout the whole text.
I would really love you to talk to us about that brain, because I think it applies to everyone towards the very, end of the play, because we just kind of, the pace just really picks up. And a lot of stuff happens at night, including some of the decisions that Freya makes. And I just would love to be reminded of that.
Yeah, so what I shared last time was a model of the brain, which I'd love to say is my own, but it's actually Dan Siegel's, who's an amazing American psychiatrist and psychologist. He's just phenomenal. But he does this handy model of the brain that really helps me and reminds me, if I flip my lid, how to get my lid back on again. So this was the handy model of the brain, if you remember it. And yes, I'm going to ask you all to do it. Yeah, a handy model of the brain. And if you just kind of open the brain. So very briefly, this is kind of our brain stem and our neck. Yeah, this is our reptilian brain as represented by our palm. This is about 400 million years old, and this is the first part that's developed, and this is the bit that's responsible for survival. Okay, then we have, if you lay your thumb across, that's our mammalian brain, which is about 200 million years old. That's the bit that's got the hippocampus in it, which stores all of our memories and links them to experiences. And that's also where our amygdala is stored, which is our fear response center. So this is also where relationships, emotions are formed. So these two work together. There's what we call our downstairs brain, our emotional brain. Okay, and relationships are here, hence mammalian, but this is actually really responsible for safe. So the reptilian brain asks, am I okay? Am I alive? How can I stay alive? This bit asks, am I safe? And that's where we have our fight, flight, freeze response, which of course, as we see so much in Romeo and Juliet, okay? Then we have our beautiful, so curl them over, human brain. If I'm working with a young child, I'll stick 2 eyes on there, yeah? Or just to kind of point out that this is the prefrontal cortex bit, the bit behind our foreheads, and this is the bit that is responsible for rational and reasonable thought. This is the bit that allows us to pause before we say something really, 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 really stupid. This is the bit that has the power of language, okay? And this is the bit that we can use our past, to apply it to our present, and to accurately, or as much as we can, forecast our future. So this is called an integrated brain, okay? So what we want people to have, especially adolescents, especially Romeo and Juliet, is we want them to have an integrated brain, because an integrated brain, if you notice, means that all 3 parts are communicating successfully with each other. Now, when life gets difficult and we have a trigger, whether it's a thought, I'm never going to see Juliet again, or whether it's actually something in our real world, we have a habit of flipping our lid. And when we flip our lid, we disengage, which is where the term unhinged comes from. We kind of become disengaged. We're not able to use language. We're not able to use the power of reflection or projection. Okay? We're in our emotional downstairs brain, which is our dog brain. Okay? So it's the, if you kind of see a dog and a dog goes and does something, then the following day it will do exactly the same thing again. We as humans kind of learn from our experiences in theory. So this is kind of our animal brain, our emotional brain, and we need to teach young people how to get their lids back on when they are emotionally all over the shop. But the beauty of it is it kind of just reminds me often that we need to learn. We can't control thoughts and emotions. None of us can, okay? But the problem that we have, and it's true in Romeo and Juliet as well, is that we tend to label some emotions as good and some as bad. And the minute we do that, using the words positive and negative, the minute we are just not willing to experience a whole bank of human emotions. There are many human emotions, but what we know is that young people see unhappiness or sadness or shame or self-disgust as being something that they don't want, that they're not willing to have. And that's when self-harming behaviour comes in, an unwillingness to experience the full range of human emotions. If we can teach, if young people understood that emotions are energy in motion, they start in the body first, they go up to our brain, how we interpret them is whether or not we can keep our lids on. And it's natural and normal to flip our lids many times in the day. But when you're with somebody who's flipped theirs, Friar Lawrence, it would have been nice if he'd done a few things to help Romeo actually get his rational and reasonable brain back on board. And he did that, of course, and so did the nurse, making eye contact. The power of touch is hugely important. All of them send a powerful message to our brains to say we're safe. And that's actually the key. So the problem we have at the moment is that most triggers for young people are not actually danger in their real world. Most of the triggers are thoughts and emotions, which is why it's so invisible.
But he has both. As Romeo, which is worse.
Oh, absolutely. And he has catastrophic black and white thinking. If you think that every time you have that thought, you're flipping your lid, then the levels of adrenaline and cortisol that you have in your system means that you are much more likely to detect threat and be vigilant looking for it. And guess what? Most people find it when they go out looking for it. But worse still, most young people, and I'd say actually I'll put myself in there, adults too, we don't have the awareness that our lids are flipped. So we walk around in a highly vulnerable state, and that's when we often do some things that we look back on and think, whoa. The reason Romeo is so vulnerable is because he's in love, and love, along with shame, create and anger have the greatest impact on the arousal levels in our body. It's all consuming love. I don't know whether you remember I did that emotions map in the thing that we did. You know, love is, and so shame and self-disgust are hugely, they impact every single part of our body. Depression, on the other hand, is the absence of arousal. But if you look at love, it is astonishing how all-consuming and how arousing it is. And it reminds me of what we said last time about, it really is, with teenagers, love and being in love really is a matter of life and death. It really is. Whatever the influences of wise counsel, it can be and often is, which is why suicide can be so contagious and happen so often in pairs. So I guess there's a responsibility for the show too, isn't it? How this is depicted as well. It's such an interesting one in Romeo and Juliet because of course it's just so infamous, isn't it? I mean, I was just about to say it's not a black and white issue, and I was actually just about to say that, and then I just realised it's interesting, isn't it? How we use this language, and in the play as well, that difference between dark and light and nighttime, and there's actually so many complexities and layers to something, and I guess it's important not to make assumptions that our audience can make sense of that. Maybe there is more that we can do. You know, you can.
Ah, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Shall I believe that unsubstantial death is amorous and keeps thee here to be his paramour? For fear of that, I still will stay with thee and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars from this world-wearied flesh. Eyes, look your last. Arms, take your last embrace, and lips, O you, the doors of breath seal with a righteous kiss, a dateless bargain to engrossing death. Here's to my love. Oh, true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. Thus with a kiss, I die.